The coffee pot hissed in the kitchen, releasing the same familiar steam it had every morning for the past 47 years. I stood at the counter, pouring 2 cups. One for him, one for me. Sugar for him, black for me. The routine was carved into me like muscle memory. To anyone looking in, we were the picture of a couple who had mastered marriage. Neighbors often said, "You two are proof that love can last." They envied our steadiness. Our front porch always swept clean, our lawn trimmed, our hands brushing against each other when we carried groceries in from the car. I smiled when they said it, nodded when they gushed. But inside, something tugged, a small thread that threatened to unravel everything. He sat at the table with the newspaper folded neatly in his hands, glasses perched on his nose. "They're raising property taxes again," he muttered, shaking his head. I forced a chuckle, as though we hadn't been having that same conversation for years. The truth was, we lived in repetition. He read, I cleaned. He drove, I sat beside him. He fell asleep with the television on. I turned it off when his breathing grew heavy. It was comfort, yes, but it was also a cage. Sometimes, when I looked across the table, I wondered if I knew him at all. His face had changed with age, lines deepening around his mouth, gray overtaking the brown in his hair. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled me. It was his eyes. Cold at times, unreadable. A silence lived there that had nothing to do with peace. I told myself every marriage had its shadows. No one really knew what went on behind closed doors. Maybe I was imagining things. After all, hadn't we built a life together? Children, holidays, the ordinary chaos of years stacked upon years. Didn't that count for something? Still, there were moments I couldn't shake. The way he'd avoid questions that seemed harmless. Where were you last night when you said you couldn't sleep? Why did you look so shaken when you came in from the garage? His answers were always short, wrapped in irritation, as though I had trespassed into territory that was his alone. I learned to stop asking. Silence became my compromise. And in that silence, we looked perfect. That morning, as I set his cup down beside him, he looked up at me briefly. Just a glance, but something in it caught me. Not warmth, not gratitude. A flicker of calculation. My stomach tightened, though I quickly smoothed my face into a smile. "You're quiet today," he said. "Just tired," I replied. It was easier than telling him the truth, that sometimes, sitting across from him, I felt like I was living with a stranger who happened to wear my husband's skin. I turned my gaze to the window. Outside, Mrs. Gallagher was trimming her rose bushes. She waved, her face lit with that wide, approving smile she always gave me. I waved back, my hand steady, my smile rehearsed. To her, I was the lucky wife. To myself, I was the actress in a play I hadn't auditioned for. The illusion of perfection was almost comforting in its consistency. But illusions crack. I didn't know it yet, but soon mine would shatter in ways I couldn't prepare for. For now, I held my coffee cup, sipped the bitterness, and convinced myself it was enough. Yet beneath the quiet clinking of spoons and the rustle of newspapers, unease whispered louder than ever. And in his silence, always his silence, I began to hear the first echoes of something darker. Something waiting. It started with a letter. I was dusting the bookshelf in the living room, moving volumes that hadn't been touched in years, when an envelope slipped out and landed at my feet. The paper was yellowed, the ink faint, but the handwriting was neat and deliberate. I frowned, tracing the date on the corner, June 1978. That was the summer after we married. Curiosity burned. I unfolded it carefully, expecting perhaps an old note from a friend. But the words on the page froze me. I missed the nights we shared. Does she suspect anything yet? I stared at the letter until the words blurred. My first instinct was denial. It had to be a joke, or maybe a fragment of fiction. He loved to read crime novels. Perhaps he'd copied something down. But why keep it hidden in a book? Why keep it at all? When I showed him the letter that evening, he glanced at it once, then brushed it aside. An old prank. Someone at work must have slipped it into my things decades ago. His laugh was hollow, the kind he used when he wanted to end a conversation quickly. I nodded, though my chest tightened. For years I had trained myself to accept his explanations, no matter how thin they sounded. Still, that night as he slept beside me, I replayed the words. Does she suspect anything yet? The unease followed me into the days ahead. I began noticing details I had once overlooked. Receipts tucked into his wallet from places he'd claimed never to visit. A suit jacket dry cleaned in a town an hour away. Birthdays he seemed to forget, then later recalled with unnerving precision as though rehearsed. One evening I pulled out the family photo albums, hoping to soothe myself with memories. Yet as I flipped through the pages, something gnawed at me. In the margins of several photos, faint pencil marks appeared, dates that didn't match the events. A trip marked as 1986, though I knew it had been 87. A birthday party noted as October when it was clearly June. Alone at the kitchen table, I whispered, "Why would you change the dates?" No answer came, of course. Only the hum of the refrigerator, steady and indifferent. I told myself I was being dramatic. After all, decades of life together are bound to create forgotten details, misplaced notes, small mistakes. Maybe it was my memory that faltered. Age has a way of blurring things, and yet, there were the absences. Nights he claimed he couldn't sleep and went for drives. Business trips that never left a paper trail. Mornings when he returned from the garage with his shirt damp with sweat, though the car hadn't moved an inch. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. At night, as I lay awake, the walls creaked with sounds that felt like whispers. Pipes wood settling, I told myself. But in the silence, the noise grew heavy, like the house was guarding a secret it couldn't contain. One afternoon, I mentioned the noises casually. "Do you hear it too? The walls at night?" His gaze snapped to me, sharp, then softened too quickly. Old houses groan. "You know that?" "Yes," I murmured. But inside, a thought crystallized. It wasn't the house whispering. It was the life we had built, straining under the weight of something I wasn't meant to know. The illusion was cracking. Small, almost invisible fractures, but I could feel them widening. I wasn't sure yet what lay beneath, but I knew, whatever it was, it had always been there, waiting, and for the first time in years, I began to wonder if the man I called my husband had ever truly been mine at all. The memory came back like lightning splitting the sky, sudden, sharp, and impossible to ignore. It was years ago, maybe 3 decades, maybe more. A stormy night that rattled the windows and set the trees thrashing against the roof. I had been sitting by the fireplace, a book in hand, when he stood suddenly. No explanation, no warning, just the scrape of his chair against the wood floor. "I need to step out," he muttered. "In this weather?" I asked, startled. Rain was pounding so fiercely that the gutters overflowed like waterfalls. He didn't answer. He grabbed his coat and keys and left. The door slammed, the echo swallowed by thunder. I stood there in the silence that followed, clutching my book, as though the pages might explain what my husband could not. I told myself not to worry. He'd always been private, a man of few words, a man who carried his thoughts like stones in his pocket, heavy, hidden. But that night, something in his eyes had unsettled me. Not anger, not even irritation, but something I could not name. I paced the house for hours, every clap of thunder vibrating through my chest. Midnight came, then 2, then 3. The clock's steady ticking mocked me as I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. Where could he be? Why hadn't he called? At dawn, headlights swept across the window. His car pulled into the driveway. Relief surged until I saw him step out. His coat was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his face was unreadable. "Where have you been?" I asked the moment he crossed the threshold. He brushed past me, shrugging off his coat. "Couldn't sleep. Went for a drive." "All night?" "Yes, don't start, Margaret." His tone was clipped, final, as though the conversation were already over. I pressed once more. "What was so important that you'd leave me here, worried sick?" His eyes flicked toward me then, cold and sharp. "I told you, a drive. Do you want to make it something it's not?" The word stung, but the look stung more. I had learned by then to step back, to fold my questions into silence. So I let it go, though the unease stayed. For years afterward, I told myself it was nothing. A restless night, a harmless escape. Men needed their space, I reasoned, and he had always returned to me. Wasn't that proof enough of loyalty? But now, decades later, standing in the same kitchen where I had waited that stormy night, I saw it differently. That was not restlessness. That was not harmless. That was the night something shifted, though I had been too blind or too trusting to see it. What had he been doing? Where had he gone? Who or what had waited for him in the storm? The questions circled endlessly in my mind, refusing to quiet. I revisited every detail. The dampness of his shoes, the faint smell clinging to his coat, not rain but something metallic, sharp, almost like iron. I remembered how his hands shook when he reached for his coffee the next morning. Though he tried to steady them, I remembered, too, how he didn't touch me for days after that night. Not a hand on my shoulder, not a kiss before bed. He moved around the house like a shadow, silent, present, but distant. It was the first time I had felt truly alone in my marriage. And though we smoothed over the silence, returning to our routines, a fracture had formed. Small, invisible to anyone else, but deep enough that I could feel it every time I looked at him. Now, as the memory sharpened, I wondered, had that storm carried away more than branches and shingles? Had it carried away the last of our innocence, the last of my belief in him? Because if the whispers in the walls were right, if the inconsistencies piling around me weren't just chance, then that night was not a restless whim. It was the beginning. And everything I thought I knew about my husband unraveled from there. The questions had been gnawing at me for weeks. Ever since that night returned to me like a ghost. I tried to ignore them, tried to bury them beneath laundry, dinner menus, and the daily rhythm of chores. But unease has a way of crawling back to the surface. One evening, as the sun sank and the shadows stretched long across the living room, I asked him. My voice was calm, too calm, the way a hand trembles only when you hold it still. Do you remember that stormy night? The one you left without saying why? His eyes flicked up from the newspaper. What night? You know which one. You were gone until morning. He folded the paper slowly, deliberately, like a man buying himself time. Margaret, that was decades ago. You're really dredging that up now? Yes. I surprised myself with the firmness of the word, because things don't add up. The letters I found, the dates that don't align, your silences. I can't keep pretending. A flicker passed through his face. Annoyance, or was it fear? Then he smiled, a thin, practiced smile. You're misremembering. You've always had a way of dramatizing things. The words hit like a slap. Dramatizing, as though my doubt, my fear, was nothing but a script I'd invented. I'm not misremembering, I said. I know what I saw. What I felt. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You felt restless, that's all. You've been restless lately, haven't you? Making stories out of shadows. My chest tightened. Don't do that. Don't twist this around. But he already was. His voice softened like a parent coaxing a child. You've been under stress. That's why you're thinking this way. You need rest, not suspicion. Gaslighting, it wasn't a word I would have known back then, but I knew the feeling. The steady erosion of certainty. The sense that the ground beneath me was shifting. Not because it moved, but because someone else was pulling it out from under my feet. I'm not imagining things, I whispered. He sighed, standing, towering over me. After 47 years, Margaret, don't you think I deserve the benefit of the doubt? Or are you so eager to believe the worst of me? The way he said it, calm, logical, almost sorrowful, made me falter. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe I was chasing ghosts. That was the trap. The more he spoke, the more my anger bent into guilt. But beneath the guilt, suspicion pulsed, steady and alive. That night I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was steady, almost mechanical, as though he slept without dreams. I wanted to reach out, to press my hand against his chest the way I used to feel the steady beat of reassurance. But I couldn't. The distance between us was only inches, but it may as well have been a mile. I turned on my side, studying the shape of him in the dark. The man I had shared a bed with for decades. The man who had built this house with me, who had raised children beside me, who had said vows with trembling hands all those years ago. Yet he felt like someone else now, a stranger. And the most terrifying part was not that I didn't recognize him. It was that I wondered if I ever truly had. The knock came just after breakfast, sharp and deliberate. I was still clearing the table, the clinking of dishes masking the first rap against the door. When it came again, louder this time, I felt an odd prickle along my spine. My husband looked up from the newspaper, his face unusually pale, though he tried to hide it. Expecting anyone? He asked, his voice light, but his hand trembled as he folded the page. I shook my head, wiping my hands on a dish towel. No. When I opened the door, two men stood there, suits, calm eyes. The kind of posture that speaks of authority, without needing to announce it. "Mrs. Caldwell?" The taller one asked politely. "Yes," I managed. He gave a small nod. "Detectives Harris and Monroe. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your husband." For a moment, my world tilted. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock in the hall. Behind me, I felt my husband step closer, his presence a shadow pressing against my back. "What's this about?" he asked, voice firm but strained. The shorter detective glanced at a notebook. "It's routine," he said smoothly. "We're revisiting some old cases. Just need to confirm whereabouts, nothing to worry about." But the way his eyes lingered on my husband told a different story. I invited them in, though my hands trembled as I gestured toward the living room. My husband stayed standing, arms crossed as though bracing himself. "Where were you in March of 1987? Harris asked, casual, as if he were asking about the weather. My breath caught. 1987, nearly 40 years ago. Who remembers details that far back? But my husband answered quickly, too quickly. "I was working out of state. Business trip." Monroe scribbled something in his notebook. "And do you recall the exact dates?" He hesitated this time. I noticed the flicker of his eyes, the smallest crack in his composure. I felt my stomach tighten. A memory surged, the stormy night I had unearthed just days ago when he left without explanation. Could that be the same time? The detectives exchanged a glance, subtle but loaded. Harris leaned forward. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you recall your husband being away during that period?" I froze. My mouth opened, but no sound came. My husband's gaze cut into me, sharp, warning. "She doesn't remember," he said smoothly. "It was decades ago," I forced a smile. But inside my heart pounded so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. They asked a few more questions. Details about family trips, friends we might have visited, phone numbers long since gone. Each question seemed simple, but the undertone was heavy, probing. Finally, Harris closed his notebook. "Thank you for your time. If you think of anything, give us a call." He slid a card onto the coffee table. When the door shut behind them, silence pressed against my ears. My husband exhaled, long and shaky, then snapped, "Don't ever answer questions you don't have to. Do you understand?" His tone wasn't pleading, it was commanding. Like he was warning me. I nodded, though fear rose in my throat like bile. "Routine," I whispered, more to myself than him. But the way his hands shook as he reached for his cigarette pack told me it was anything but routine. For the first time, the cracks in our marriage no longer seemed small. They felt like gaping holes, and through them, I glimpsed something I wasn't ready to face, and yet, deep down, I knew. The first knock was only the beginning. After the detectives left, the house felt like it was holding its breath. My husband paced the kitchen, muttering about wasting time on old ghosts, but I barely heard him. My mind clung to the date they'd mentioned, 1987. The stormy night came back to me with startling clarity, and with it, a dread that refused to loosen its grip. That night, long after he fell asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Questions pulsed in my mind. What did they mean, old cases? Why did he flinch at that year? And why did his voice tremble when he told me never to answer? By morning, curiosity had sharpened into something heavier, fear mixed with resolve. When he left for his errands, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust and cobwebs greeted me, the air stale, heavy with secrets. I had been in the attic hundreds of times over the years, mostly to store Christmas decorations or old clothes. But that morning, I wasn't looking for anything ordinary. I was looking for what he didn't want me to see. Near the back, behind stacked boxes of tax papers and holiday lights, I found it, a small trunk, unmarked and tucked away as if forgotten. But it wasn't forgotten. I could tell by the faint layer of dust, thinner than the rest, that it had been touched more recently than the others. My heart pounded as I dragged it into the light. The latch gave way with a reluctant creak. Inside, I found things that didn't belong to us, or at least not to the life I thought we'd built. A small child's toy car, its paint chipped but clearly once loved. A faded woman's scarf, soft between my fingers, carrying the faint trace of perfume long gone. And then, newspaper clippings folded neatly, yellowed with age. I unfolded the first. The headline screamed at me, "Local woman missing, last seen leaving work." My throat tightened. Another clipping followed. Family pleads for answers after mother vanishes. My fingers shook as I read the dates. All of them lined up with nights he had claimed to be working late, out of town, tied up in meetings. My knees buckled, and I sat back against a box, the attic spinning around me. Could it be coincidence? Or had I been living next to a truth too monstrous to name? The scarf slipped from my hand, landing across my lap like an accusation. I wanted to scream, to march downstairs and demand answers, but something inside me whispered caution. His reaction to the detectives, the way his eyes had burned into mine with unspoken warning. It all told me that confronting him now could be dangerous. So I gathered the items back into the trunk, careful to return them exactly as I found them. I memorized their weight, their placement, the way the scarf was folded. If he ever noticed they had been disturbed, I'd have no way to explain it. Before I closed the lid, I touched the toy car once more. It was small, harmless, innocent, yet it felt like holding proof that our entire marriage had been built on lies. I slid the trunk back into its hiding place and left the attic, my legs trembling beneath me. Downstairs, I reheated the coffee he had left behind, my hands wrapped around the mug for warmth, though nothing could thaw the chill that had settled inside me. When he returned later, his smile was strained, his voice too careful. He asked about my day, and I answered lightly, as though nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Because now I carried a secret of my own. I knew where the past was buried, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to unearth it, or if it would unearth me first. The days after I discovered the box in the attic dragged on like years. I pretended, smiled, and served dinner, but every movement felt rehearsed, every word a mask. My husband remained distant yet watchful, and though he said little, I could feel his suspicion hanging in the air like smoke. Then the detectives returned. This time, they didn't ask about his business trips or his whereabouts decades ago. Their questions sliced deeper. They laid photographs on the kitchen table, black and white images that seemed almost harmless until I saw his face among them. Not smiling, not staged, candid, sitting across from a woman I didn't recognize, their heads bent close together. Her name was Elaine Carter. They said she had disappeared in 1987. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would crack my ribs. Elaine Carter. The year matched the stormy night, the clippings in the attic, the silence that had haunted me. I forced my voice to stay steady. What does this have to do with me? One detective leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Mrs. Holloway, your husband had ties to her. We have bank records, witness statements, late-night meetings, unexplained money transfers. We believe she was more than just a business acquaintance. The word struck me like a slap. An affair. For 40 years, I had lived believing my marriage was flawed but loyal, imperfect but ours. Now, in a matter of minutes, they stripped away the illusion. He hadn't only betrayed the law, he had betrayed me. I thought back to the countless nights I'd lain awake waiting for him, the excuses he'd fed me about late meetings and impossible deadlines. I had believed him, clung to the image of the hard-working husband. But behind that, there had been her. The detective slid another photo toward me. Elaine smiling, holding a child's hand. My breath caught. The toy car from the attic flashed in my mind, its chipped paint, its silent accusation. Did your husband ever mention her? He asked softly. I shook my head. My throat felt raw, as though the truth itself was strangling me. When they finally left, I sat at the table long after the door closed, staring at those photographs. A woman I had never met, yet one who had lived in my marriage, in my house, in the shadowed parts of my husband's life. That night, I confronted him, not with words, but with silence. He noticed. Something on your mind? He asked casually, pouring himself a drink. His hand trembled, though he tried to mask it. I wanted to scream, to throw the photographs in his face, to demand he tell me what he had done to her. But the words froze. He looked at me with that cold, rehearsed calm I'd come to fear, and I realized, if I pushed too hard, I might not get another chance to breathe. So I swallowed my fury. I smiled faintly, shook my head, and said, just tired. Inside, though, the betrayal spread like poison. It wasn't only that he had lied. It was that I had trusted so blindly, protected him, defended him, built a life on the ashes of his secrets. In bed that night, I lay rigid beside him, staring into the dark. His breathing was steady, almost peaceful. Mine came in shallow bursts. The woman in the photographs haunted me. Elaine Carter, missing, never found. And my husband's shadow loomed over every detail of her life. I knew then that the detectives weren't finished, and neither was the truth. Because if Elaine was gone, the question wasn't just how, it was why. The silence between us had grown unbearable. For days I moved through the house like a ghost, pretending not to know what I had seen in the attic, pretending not to notice how often he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. My heart hammered every time the phone rang, every time a car slowed outside. Finally, the weight became too much. One evening, as rain drummed steadily against the windows, I set his dinner on the table and sat across from him, my hands folded tight. "We need to talk," I said. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. He studied me for a long moment before setting it down, as if bracing himself for a blow. "What about?" he asked, though his voice betrayed him, thin, brittle. "The detectives. The questions. The years that don't add up." My breath caught. "The things I found upstairs." For a moment I thought he'd explode. Instead, his shoulders slumped, his face collapsing into something I had never seen before, weariness laced with desperation. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Then explain it to me," I pressed. My voice trembled, but I didn't back down. "What were those things doing in our attic?" He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and when he finally spoke, his words came out like a confession rehearsed 1,000 times. "I didn't choose this," he said. "I was dragged into something I couldn't escape. People I worked with, they used me. I was forced to keep things, to cover things. If I said no, if I tried to walk away." He shook his head. "You don't know what they would have done to me." To us. His story unraveled in fragments. Shadowy men, unspoken threats, a job that had entangled him deeper than he ever intended. He painted himself as the unwilling participant, the loyal husband protecting his family. But nothing fit cleanly. "Then why hide it from me?" I asked. "If you were protecting us, why not tell me? Why let me believe?" My voice cracked. "Why let me believe our life was honest?" He reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine, but I pulled away. His eyes darkened at the rejection, though his voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "Because I needed you to believe in me," he said. "If you doubted me, even for a second, everything would fall apart. You would have left, and if you left, I couldn't control what might happen." The word control struck me like a blade. My breath quickened, my chest tight. He had said it so plainly, as if control was love, as if fear was protection. "What did you do?" I asked softly, each word scraping against my throat. "Not what they did, what you did." His eyes flickered, and for the first time I saw something colder than fear: calculation. "I did what I had to," he replied. "And if you care about yourself, about us, you'll stop digging. You'll let it go." The room seemed to tilt, the air too heavy to breathe. For the first time in decades of marriage, I didn't just mistrust him. I feared him. Every sound became sharper. The rain slapping the glass, the tick of the clock, the scrape of his chair as he stood. He towered above me, his shadow spilling across the table like a warning. "Promise me," he said. "Promise me you'll let this stay buried." I couldn't answer. My voice had deserted me, my body frozen between the urge to scream and the need to survive. His gaze lingered a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone at the table, shaking. I had thought the truth would bring clarity. Instead, it left me with a deeper darkness, one that whispered of danger not just in the past, but in the present. Because if he could lie for decades, if he could twist love into control, what else was he capable of? That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every shadow in the room stretching longer, darker. His words, "Promise me you'll let this stay buried," echoed through me, heavy and suffocating. But even worse than his demand was the realization that I already had for years. Silence wasn't new to me. It had been the backbone of our marriage. I thought back to all the small moments I had brushed aside. The receipts that didn't match his story. The phone calls he took in the garage, the unexplained nights away. Every time I chose not to dig deeper, I told myself it was better to keep the peace, better to believe in the image of us rather than risk shattering it. And in doing so, I had become his accomplice. I wanted to believe I had no choice, but the truth was harsher. I did have a choice, I just didn't take it. I had swallowed doubt after doubt until it became part of me, until silence became my language. His secret was never his alone. It lived in the spaces where I turned away. Now the weight of that silence crushed me. The detectives came again the following afternoon. Their knock rattled the front door like a warning bell. My hands shook as I opened it, trying to mask the storm inside me. "Mrs. Walker," one of them said, his tone gentle but unyielding. "We'd like to ask you a few more questions." I invited them in, my throat dry. They sat across from me in the living room, their notepads resting on their knees. "Your husband claims he was working out of state during the spring of '85, the taller detective said. "But we've uncovered evidence that contradicts that. Do you recall where he was?" The room seemed to close in around me. Of course I remembered. That was the year of the storm, the year of the night he vanished without a word and returned at dawn. But my lips trembled and the words refused to come. I don't remember clearly," I whispered. The detectives exchanged a glance. They knew I was lying. I could see it in their eyes. As they pressed me, guilt coiled tighter in my chest. Every non-answer, every deflection felt like another layer of betrayal. Not of him, but of myself. I was protecting a man who might not deserve it. Yet decades of habit chained me. I had built my life on silence, and breaking it felt like tearing down my very existence. When they finally left, promising to return, I sank into the couch and buried my face in my hands. My skin burned with shame. What terrified me most wasn't the detectives, or even the possibility of what he had done. It was the truth that I had been complicit in weaving this illusion of a perfect marriage. I had smiled for photographs, hosted dinners, played the loyal wife, all while ignoring the whispers of doubt that never truly left me. Silence had bought me stability. A home. A marriage that looked enviable from the outside. But now I saw the price, the truth rotting beneath it, and my soul rotting along with it. I thought of the box in the attic, of the scarf and the toy, of the newspaper clippings that linked back to nights he said he was working late. I thought of the way he had looked at me when I pulled my hand away. Something darker than love, something close to ownership, and I thought of the detective's eyes, sharp, watchful, waiting for me to choose. The silence was no longer just about him. It was about me. How much longer could I bear its weight before it crushed me completely? The detectives came back sooner than I expected. This time their tone was sharper, their patience thin. They no longer asked, they demanded. "Mrs. Walker," Detective Hayes said, his voice low but firm, "you need to understand something. Keeping quiet makes you part of this. If you withhold what you know, if you protect him, you'll go down with him." The words cut through me like a blade. Go down with him. For nearly half a century, my entire existence had been built around standing beside him. Through storms, through secrets, through the whispers of doubt I had never dared voice. But sitting there, with two detectives staring at me as though they could see straight through the layers of silence I'd wrapped around myself, I realized something with a clarity that terrified me. This choice wasn't between him and the law. It was between him and my own soul. Detective Morales leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "We know you've found things, evidence. That box didn't stay hidden by accident. Help us and we can protect you. Stay silent and you're complicit." My lips parted, but no words came. I thought of the attic, the scarf, the toy, the clippings, each one a tiny scream from the past I had shoved back into the dark. My hands trembled as I clasped them together, trying to stop the shaking. From the kitchen, I heard the faint scrape of a chair. He was listening. That familiar dread rose in me again. The dread I had lived with for decades. The dread of displeasing him. I could almost hear his voice in my head, smooth and commanding. "Don't betray me. Don't forget who you are without me." But then another voice rose, quieter but stronger. The one I had silenced for so long. The one that whispered, "And who are you with him?" I thought of the boy's toy in the box. The small, worn edges that suggested hands had clutched it once. A child's hands? My child's hands. The detectives waited. The air was thick with expectation. My voice cracked. I can't do this anymore. I saw the flicker of relief in their eyes. That was the moment I betrayed him. Not by speaking every detail, not yet, but by letting them see that I was willing. That my loyalty to him, the man who had stolen my life and twisted it into a prison, was over. When they left, promising to return with paperwork, I found him standing in the doorway of the kitchen. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not fear. Pure hatred. You spoke to them, he said flatly. I swallowed hard. I couldn't keep lying. He stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous. After everything I've given you, after all these years, you choose them over me? No, I whispered, tears sliding down my face. I chose myself. For the first time, the truth of those words gave me strength. I wasn't just betraying him. I was reclaiming the parts of me I had lost to his shadow. That night, I packed a small bag. Not because I knew where I was going, God, I had nowhere, but because I couldn't stay. The house felt poisoned, every wall echoing with secrets. As I zipped the bag shut, I caught sight of him through the window, standing in the yard, his figure dark against the fading light. Watching, always watching, I knew this wasn't over. Betrayal was only the beginning, but for the first time in decades, I felt the faintest flicker of freedom. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Every breath echoed. Every shuffle of papers sounded like a hammer falling. I sat in the gallery, my hands clasped tight in my lap, staring at the man I had once promised forever to. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. His shoulders were squared, his jaw tight, but his eyes darted every time the prosecutor rose with another piece of evidence. The box, the scarf, the toy, the witnesses, the financial records. Each revelation stripped away another layer of the man I thought I knew. Piece by piece, they dismantled the image I had built my life around. Mr. Walker, the prosecutor's voice rang out, sharp and unforgiving. You told investigators you were working late the night of July 14th, yet payroll records, witness testimony, and even your own bank withdrawals place you elsewhere. Care to explain? His lips curled into that familiar, practiced smile, the one that had fooled neighbors, friends, even me. I was protecting my family. Circumstances forced my hand. You don't understand what it's like, protecting. He always used that word, as if lies could be painted noble, as if betrayal could be softened by intent. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout, protecting who? Not me, not our son, but I stayed silent. My voice belonged to the prosecutors now. Detective Hayes testified next. His tone was steady, unflinching, as he laid out the trail my husband thought erased. This was not the act of a desperate man. It was deliberate, calculated, covered for decades. The defense tried to object, to spin stories of loyalty, family duty, confusion, but the evidence outweighed words. With every objection overruled, I felt my chest tighten and then release, like chains falling away one link at a time. When the woman from his past was called to the stand, I looked away. I couldn't bear her face, the voice that carried pieces of nights I never knew. Her testimony was short, but it was the blade that cut through the last illusions. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was dangerous. He had dragged her into secrets that destroyed more than one life. The judge's gavel struck, commanding order as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. My husband's mask cracked. For the first time, I saw fear, raw and unfiltered, flash across his face. That was the moment I realized I wasn't mourning him anymore. I was mourning myself. The woman who had defended him, silenced doubts, carried his lies on her back for decades. She was gone. What sat in the gallery now was someone different, someone freer. When the verdict was read, the words rang hollow in my ears, yet heavy with finality. Guilty. He turned then, finally meeting my eyes, not with love, not with regret, but with venom, as though I were the traitor, as though my betrayal outweighed his crimes. I held his gaze steady until the bailiffs led him away. The gallery emptied slowly, whispers trailing behind like smoke. I remained seated, hands still folded, staring at the wooden floor that had absorbed so much truth in one afternoon. 47 years of marriage unraveled under fluorescent lights and sworn oaths. 47 years of vows shattered in the clatter of a gavel. And yet, as I stood, my legs trembling but firm, I felt something I hadn't in decades, air in my lungs that belonged to me. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Alone, but free. The courthouse doors swung open and the afternoon light hit me like a slap. For a moment, I stood there frozen, clutching my coat around me, as though it might shield me from the stares, the whispers, the pity in strangers' eyes. The trial was over, but the weight of it clung to me like a second skin. Reporters clustered on the steps, shouting his name, my name, questions about guilt and betrayal. I kept walking, each footstep heavier than the last. I didn't look back. For the first time in decades, I wasn't tethered to him. Not to his lies, not to his secrets, not even to his presence. Freedom should have felt like air in my lungs. Instead, it felt like a void. The cab ride home was silent, the city blurring past in gray streaks. My hands trembled in my lap, not from fear anymore, but from the hollowness of what came next. I had spent most of my life as his wife, building our world on a foundation that had crumbled beneath me. Who was I without him? A widow of a marriage, mourning something that had never been real. Inside the house, the silence was unbearable. His shoes still sat by the door, neatly lined as if waiting for him. His coffee mug lingered on the counter, stained and chipped in a way that once felt comforting. Now every object was an artifact of deception. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, the photographs, the curtains I had chosen years ago. Everything seemed tainted. The laughter captured in those frames wasn't laughter at all. It was camouflage. I thought of the detective's words, of the prosecutor's voice echoing in the courtroom, of his own testimony dripping with half-truths and rehearsed emotion. He had been exposed, yes, but so had I. My silence, my loyalty, my blindness, all of it laid bare. By nightfall, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed. No, my bed now, staring at the empty space beside me. The man I had loved, defended, and believed in was gone. In truth, he had been gone for years, replaced by the stranger I finally recognized. I let the tears come then, not out of longing for him, but for the years I couldn't get back. For the woman I used to be, who had believed in forever. Freedom is a strange thing. It tasted like bitterness and ash. It pressed down on me with the same weight as captivity, only in reverse. Yet beneath the grief there was something faint, fragile, almost unrecognizable. A beginning. I lay down in the darkness, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would decide what to keep, what to throw away, what to rebuild. But tonight, I allowed myself to be nothing, no wife, no partner, no accomplice. Just a woman alone at last. The story ended not in triumph, but in the quiet ache of survival. Because the cost of truth after decades of lies is everything.